Hello and welcome to another episode of the DVD Graveyard. Tonight I wanted to take a look at the film Hatchet from 2006, directed by Adam Green. Now, this is probably one of my favorite, not only one of my favorite slasher movies, of the few and far between that we've gotten over the past 20 years, but probably one of my favorite horror movies. This is definitely one of mine that's right up my alley. And it's kind of hard to believe that this movie is 20 years old at this point. Now, of course, it came out in 2006. If you look it up, it'll say that it was released in 2007. I can't 100% verify that. 2006 was a really interesting time. So let me just kind of start here. Like in 2003, we got the Texas Chainsaw Massacre remake. And that really is what sort of kicked off this big boom of remakes that I think everyone knows and everyone kind of talks about. Shortly after that, we would get Texas Chainsaw Massacre: The Beginning, which would come out in 2006, the same year as this film, as well as the Black Christmas remake, the Hills Have Eyes remake. The following year after this, we would get the Halloween remake from Rob Zombie's Halloween. So the horror film industry was just flooded with remakes at this time. And some of most of the ones that I've actually mentioned just now, I do enjoy those movies for what they are, for one reason or another. But smack dab in the middle of this, we weren't really getting anything original, slasher wise, especially until, of course, Hatchet kind of hit the scene, and it was sort of marketed as, and it even says it on the cover and the poster art, that it is old school American horror, and that is 100% what this movie is. And that's one of the reasons I love this movie so much, is it is absolutely just a throwback to a time of just kick-ass, excellent horror films that we just weren't really seeing, at this time. Like I said, again, just everything was kind of a remake. So that was kind of one of the big selling points to this movie for me. Now, I can remember exactly the first time I saw this. I remember seeing the DVD for it at Walmart all the time, and I didn't really think much of it at the time. I was very young. Like I said, this was, I still cannot believe that this has been 20 years ago at this point. I remember the first time I actually got to watch this, I was at a friend of mine's house, and I was staying the night with him, and it was me and his little brother and him and one of our other friends had come over. And we were up really late. I mean, it was probably 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. And I remember on IFC channel, I remember seeing Hatchet come up. And I was like, oh, this is that movie that I've been kind of seeing, kind of here and there, on DVD and so on and so forth. So I was like, let's check this out. Let's watch it. We weren't doing anything else. And we watched that movie, and I absolutely fell in love with it. It was great. I couldn't believe that this was a newer film that was coming out that was kind of original, and it was kind of a callback. Again, I'm a big Friday the 13th fan, so even at the time I was a big Friday the 13th fan. So this was kind of a callback to something like Friday the 13th. So I was very happy to see something like this at the time. And of course, like I said, I was very young, and this was very early in my collecting stage. And so by the time I actually went to get a copy of this, they had already either sold out or just kind of stopped carrying it at Walmart. I don't even remember where I got my actual copy of the DVD. I ended up getting it several years later. But I'm really surprised that they carried this. And the thing that really kind of puzzles me even to this day, and I've said it in other videos, is I don't really know why this movie never really took off. I just don't. I think it was too ahead of its time, because looking at something like Terrifier, for example, which would come out 10 years after this movie, Terrifier just blew up, especially with Terrifier 2. Not so much the first one, which I love the first Terrifier, but the second one I think is really where that one blew up and kind of went out. And they were more or less doing the same thing that Hatchet was doing. It was kind of a callback to, that old school classic grindhouse era slasher film. And so, me personally, I prefer Hatchet over Terrifier. I prefer Victor Crowley. I prefer the setting of the Honey Island swamp. That kind of Friday the 13th Texas Chainsaw vibe that Hatchet has versus what Terrifier kind of has going on. You can say that's blasphemy, whatever you want, but that's just me personally. I do like Terrifier, but I don't really. It just always puzzled me why that movie took off, and I've said this several times to people that I personally think that Hatchet walked so that Terrifier could run. But anyway, that's kind of my little spiel on that note. I could kind of go on and talk about that all day because, again, like I said, I absolutely love this movie. So as I said earlier, this movie was directed by Adam Green. Now, I didn't know much about Adam Green at the time. I've gone back and watched several of his movies now. Of course, he did the film Frozen, which I think is probably his most popular film other than Hatchet, which is a good kind of survival horror film. He did a film called Digging Up the Marrow, which is kind of like a monster sort of kind of fantasy horror film in a way, if you will. Kind of the best way to describe it. Another movie of his that I actually enjoy is Spiral, which was actually co-directed with Joel David Moore, who would be in this movie as well. Him and Adam Green kind of co-directed that movie, which is actually a really good movie. I did enjoy it, and I haven't watched it in a long time, but just from what I recall, I really did enjoy that movie quite a bit. But this movie is kind of like probably my favorite film that he's done, which is probably kind of a lot of people's opinion, I suppose. I don't know. That's just me. This movie also has a really big, not in volume, like it does not in like size wise, but the cast is full of big time horror alumni. So of course, Adam Green himself is actually in this film. He has a very small, very minor role. But of course, Victor Crowley, the titular killer in this film, is played by Kane Hodder, who would famously play. He's not my favorite actor to play Jason, but he played Jason pretty much more than anybody else, as well as Thomas Crowley, which is Victor's father, which we'll get more into that later. Robert Englund has a small role in this movie. Of course, Freddy Krueger himself is in this film for a brief little stint. John Carl Buechler is in this movie in a very small role, who would direct one of the Friday the 13th. As well as do, countless special effects. For all kinds of horror films. Tony Todd is in this movie. Famously Candyman. He's great. He's got a small role in this. Of course, his role is larger in later films. Of course, like I mentioned earlier, Joel David Moore is in this movie. He's great. He's kind of our leading man in this film. Tamara Feldman, who plays Mary Beth, she's kind of the leading girl in this movie, if you will. Perry Shin, which he's kind of a sort of a minor. Well, I don't really want to say minor character, but he has a smaller role in this movie, but he's sort of a recurring actor in this series, which we'll talk about him more when we get to the next films. But I really like him in this movie. I almost forgot Richard Riel is in this movie. He's one of those guys that, if you see him, you know who he is. You probably don't know him by name, but if you see him in something, you'll know exactly who Richard Riel, I think is how you say his last name, Riel, something like that. He is in this movie as well, and just does a great job. He's not in it for too long, just kind of spoiling that little bit there. So before I get too far into this, like I said, before I actually start the actual review, I'm going to read the plot synopsis off the back of this DVD that I have. This is just the basic Anchor Bay release that, again, like I said, I used to see it at Walmart all the time. I don't even remember where I got this for the first time or anything like that, but it's been with me for a while. Anyway, I'm going to read the back of the I'm going to read the back of the plot synopsis off this one before I actually get into the review. So, get ready for one of the most talked about red-blooded American horror movies of the past 20 years. When a group of New Orleans tourists takes a haunted swamp tour, they slam face first into the local legend of deformed madman Victor Crowley. What follows is a psycho spree of seat-jumping scares, eye-popping nudity, skull-splitting mayhem, and beyond. Joel David Moore, Dion Richmond, Tamara Feldman, and Mercedes McNabb star along with horror icons Kane Hodder, Robert Englund, Tony Todd in this screamingly funny carnage classic that Ain't It Cool News hails as so indescribably awesome that you just cannot conceive. So I guess I didn't really have to go over the cast before this because they mentioned most of it on the back there. Now there was actually another horror alumni. I just want to note this really quick before I get into the review. Also, there was another horror actress that was going to be in this movie that was not able to be in this movie for one reason or another. I don't remember why, but they would come back for the next film, which we will mention when we get there. I think everybody knows exactly who I'm talking about, but again, I will reference that whenever we get there. When this movie starts out, we are introduced to two characters at the beginning who are out gator hunting in this swamp, and we immediately get some gruesome kills, one of these people being Robert Englund, by the way. But we immediately get some gruesome gore effects in this movie. And after that, we basically are following a group of friends who are at Mardi Gras. This film takes place in New Orleans. And so they're at Mardi Gras, and the lead guy, Joel David Moore, is kind of he's going through a breakup, so he's kind of bummed and doesn't really want to be there. And he wants to do something else while they're in New Orleans. So they decide to go on this swamp tour. Where they get on this boat and they go through the swamp and they tell them horror stories and so on and so forth. And that's where they run into Tony Todd, at Marie Laveau's House of Voodoo, who basically tells them that he's not running the swamp tour. Somebody, around the block will take them on a swamp tour. They have a funny little interaction, but tells them to go down there and check with them. So once they go in, they end up paying the price, and they run into a couple other folks who are going on this swamp tour. So they load onto this short bus, and they decide, they ride to the Honey Island swamp, where they get onto this boat, and they are kind of stopped by John Carl Buechler's character, Jack Cracker, who kind of tells them, he's kind of the crazy Ralph of this movie, telling them not to go into the swamp, because of Victor Crowley and so on and so forth. So, cool little cameo. So, as they go into the swamp, the tour guide, played by Perry Shin, is kind of telling them some kind of ghost stories and stuff like that. And he kind of briefly goes over the legend of Victor Crowley. And during this time, Joel David Moore, this is where he meets Mary Beth, which is just this girl that's kind of there by herself. And she's kind of like, that's not the story of Victor Crowley, blah blah blah, all this good stuff. She doesn't really want to be bothered. She's kind of this hard ass kind of girl. And so as they're going along, it starts to they hit something. They basically they don't crash the boat, but the boat is stuck, and it starts to storm. So they get off the boat. One of the people is injured whenever they're getting off the boat. And when they come on shore, they know that they have to walk out of this swamp. So I want to talk about this briefly before I get too far into this. This movie is it was shot on location, I'm pretty sure, for part of it. And then the other part of it, I think, are sets, if I'm not mistaken. Now, I actually really like the look of sets and stuff, especially like outdoor sets, if they're done correctly. It just had that kind of cheap look to it, if that makes sense. But I don't mean that as a bad thing by any means at all. So I really like the look of the sets. Like I said, I'm pretty sure that's how it was. It was half and half. Half of it was in an actual swamp, and then whenever they're basically on foot and kind of going to the house and everything like that, it was sets. So basically, as they're going on, they're carrying one of the injured, and we see the Crowley house. And that is where we are introduced for the first time to Victor Crowley, who is a very horrifying and very creepy, he's somebody that you do not want to be, that you do not want to cross paths with by any means. He just comes out of nowhere and immediately brutally kills these two people, one of which being my favorite kill of the movie. It's the kind of jaw rip. I love that effect. So I'll pause again to kind of talk about that. All of the effects in this movie are practical effects, and they look fantastic. Again, it was just it was a breath of fresh air around this time to see these cheesy, goofy practical effects being done, it made me so happy at the time, and still does to this day. Anytime I watch this movie, this movie is just an absolute gem. I love it. It was doing everything right, in my opinion. Everything was going great. So the group takes off and runs into the woods, and I believe they're separated at this point. And that is where we hear the legend of Victor Crowley, which is where Mary Beth, she kind of tells the story of Victor Crowley and why she is there in the first place, because her father and her brother went missing in this swamp, which are the two people that we met at the beginning of this movie, Robert Englund and her brother, which I cannot remember his name off the top of my head. But so basically what happened was Victor lived with his father, Thomas, who was also played by Kane Hodder. And one night, these kids were trying to prank him on, like, Halloween, I think it was. And they end up catching the house on fire. And his father comes home and is trying to get into the house because Victor's trying to escape. He's just this big, deformed boy. He's going to do anything he can to get his son out of this this cabin. And so he grabs this hatchet and he's hacking his way through the door. And as he does this, he accidentally hits Victor right in the face and kills Victor. It's a very sad, very tragic story. And it's a really good backstory. You know, they don't over-explain it. Now, we do get more backstory in the next film, but it's a very tragic, very sad, but very short and kind of simple and to the point kind of backstory to this character, and I think it works perfectly. And so on that note, kind of the reason Victor is back from the dead and roaming around the swamp is that he has come back looking for his father, and he will kill anyone who enters his swamp. And that is why this kind of swamp has been, that's why this swamp has kind of been closed off, and why nobody's really doing the tours and everything like that. So, as the movie goes on, everyone is sort of picked off one by one. We get some excellent, gory, great, just horribly violent kills in this movie. It's great. It's fantastic. All the kills in this movie are spectacular. I cannot say that enough. I mean, if you're wanting something super violent, this is it. Something brutal and horrifying, this is it. I mean, people are getting cut down the middle. People are getting their jaws ripped open, getting their arms ripped off. I mean, just you name it. A guy gets his head twisted all the way around. I mean, it's just, you name it, it's going to happen in this movie. It's fantastic. So much blood in this entire movie. It sprays and just, it's incredible. It's a great time. So when we come down to it, Mary Beth and Joel David Moore are kind of the last to survive. And Victor, he is not going down. He's been shot, he's been stabbed, he's been burned. Nothing is stopping Victor from coming after them. And so finally, Joel David Moore's character, Ben is his name. He is stabbed in the foot with this kind of metal pole off of this gate in the cemetery that they come to. And basically they do the whole, like, I guess charging bear thing, you could say, is where Victor is kind of charging at them, and they bend the pole and it like impales Victor and ultimately kills him, or so we think it kills him. And we get a really nice kind of close-up of Victor's face, which is something I want to mention too here, is Victor looks so good in this movie. They changed the design slightly in the next couple of films, but, again, we'll touch on that when we get there. So after it's all said and done, Joel David Moore is separated from this kind of pole thing that's stabbed in his foot, and him and Mary Beth kind of limp to the shore, and they find her father's alligator hunting boat. And they get in the boat, and they kind of start to float out of the swamp. As this happens, Mary Beth falls overboard, or she's pulled overboard by Victor. I can't remember exactly what happens, but I'm pretty sure, I think Victor jumps up and pulls her over the side. And Joel David Moore's freaking out, and he's trying to get her out of the swamp. And from her perspective, we see a hand, Joel David Moore's hand coming down to help her up. And she grabs onto the hand, and as she pulls up, we see that it is Victor has Joel David Moore's hand, and he's the one that pulled Mary Beth up. And Joel David Moore is laying over in the side of the boat, just dying, and Victor is screaming in her face. Mary Beth is screaming back in his face, and the movie literally cuts to black right then and there. And that is such a really cool way to end this movie, especially because the next film will pick up directly where this one leaves off. When I first saw this without having seen the second one, because I saw the second one shortly after it came out, so I didn't even know if there was talks of a sequel at this point. But I just thought it was such a smart way to end the movie, just cut it off right there. And then, of course, when I saw the second one, it picks up directly after that. That was awesome. I love when movies do stuff like that. So anyway, that was Hatchet from 2006. This is such a fun, crazy, gory, ridiculous movie. If you are a fan of old school, classic, grindhouse style 80s slasher films, you're gonna be a fan of this movie. You're gonna enjoy it. It is great. It's gory, like I said. It's funny. That's something I didn't even mention, is that the comedy in this movie is great. It's got a huge cast of people that you're gonna recognize. You're gonna sit through this movie and be like, I know that guy, or I know that girl, or so on and so forth. This is just a movie that I will recommend to just about anyone, and I would probably consider it. It probably wouldn't be super high up on the list, but it is one of my favorite horror movies of all time, and it's definitely one of the best horror movies I've seen in the past 20 years or so. And again, it just blows my mind that this movie is 20 years old. That is truly crazy, because I remember when this was coming out, and like I said, seeing the DVD everywhere and watching it on TV for the first time, like I mentioned earlier, and it's just crazy to me that. I don't know, and I don't know if it's just because the first time I saw this, I was in the right state of mind, and it was the right place, right time. Again, I saw this like 2 o'clock in the morning, very late at a friend's house on a very old TV. It's a perfect movie for a time like that. You're just staying up late with friends, and you can kind of laugh at it and just kind of just get into it. And it is subsequently a movie that I go back to all the time. A friend of mine who's probably actually watching this right now, we actually used to even have Hatchet parties where we would just get drunk and watch the Hatchet trilogy. And it was just such a good time. And that's something I can say about this movie. It's a great time. I highly recommend it. I'm pretty sure it is streaming on Tubi if you get the chance to watch it. I know that the sequels are, but I'm not 100% on this one because I think the sequels were actually released by a different company. So having said that, let me speak on that. There is 3 sequels to this. So there is Hatchet 2, which would come out I think in 2010, and then Hatchet 3, which I think came out in 2013 if I'm not mistaken, and then Victor Crowley, which is the 4th film. And I cannot remember when that one came out. I want to say like 2017, something like that, somewhere around in there, if I'm not mistaken. I've seen Victor Crowley the least. Now I didn't dislike it. I remember liking it for what it was. I remember, kind of being on the fence, because the trilogy, not trying to show my hand too soon, but the trilogy wraps up really well at the end of Hatchet 3, I think, personally. So I was a very kind of apprehensive about a 4th Hatchet film, and I was kind of going into it, I was like, I'm probably not going to like this, but I actually liked it a lot more than I expected to. Again, not trying to show my hand too soon. But we will talk about those when we get there, because I really look forward to talking about Hatchet 2. That one's probably, I go back and forth all the time between the first one and the second one, because I really, really like the second one. Again, it might have been one of those things that it was right place, right time when I watched it, but that one really just kind of struck a chord with me. And I really love that one. And I like Hatchet 3 as well. It's just, again, it's probably the weakest of the trilogy in my personal opinion, which I will discuss that when I don't know what that was. I will discuss that whenever we get there. But for now, like I said, I just wanted to show some appreciation for this classic first film. It is such a great movie. Again, highly recommend it. If you get the chance, definitely check this movie out. Stay tuned for the next episode. As always, I hope you enjoyed this review. Everyone, have a great night, and goodbye.